Hello, selectors, and welcome to the Life Burst Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Andrew.
And I'm Tiffany. Welcome back to the Life Burst Podcast, a Wixoss podcast where we talk about all the Wixoss things and only the Wixoss things, and the only thing we can really focus on is the upcoming GP.
That's true. This one was a little delayed. We're doing a first of three parts for a podcast here, where we're going to deep dive a little bit into some of the things that you'll be seeing at the GP. I realize I should have gotten something ready, which was like the, like what do you bring to a GP? How do you prep for a GP? Like literally the GP stuff. But maybe we'll do that for the second part. But we'll go into it. But real quick. Just before we dive into what the GP stuff is. I did pretty good in the last local tournament that we had.
You did. You had a pretty good Wixoss week.
That's true. I'm gonna post up the results later. We had six people show up for this one, and first place was me in Aya Tempo, spending all them coins, getting ready to make all those GP
Aya
Vegas
is
bets.
so punishing.
Yeah. I did actually try pretty hard to try to crack Aya a bit, just because I found it as an interesting deck type and something I'm not super used to and wanted to really perfect. But it was coins all around for our locals. Second place was Donna. Surprisingly enough, a cool
Yeah, there
Donna
were some
brew.
interesting decks that people brought to our locals.
Yeah, shout out to our Donna player who brought Donna and. She had her assists were Bang and brain firing on the other one. What is it? It was a black assist, I think, right?
Is it Machina?
No, maybe it was something else. Anyways, I'm getting.
We're gonna post the deck lists up for you fellow selectors so you can check out some of the builds that we've gone up against.
Maybe it was
week.
Machina. I feel like it was Machina.
What other black assist would you play?
Nanashi sometimes.
Oh, maybe it was Nanashi.
Nanashi's a good one.
No, that was for the Love It deck. There was a Love It
Yes.
deck as well, and that one played Nanashi.
Yeah, love it. Nanashi's a pretty good.
It was
pretty good assist.
Machina.
Yeah, I think it was Machina.
I remember the wing smash.
Yeah, it was sort of this like grind and attrition matchup, which was actually pretty cool. And it used GGG.
G.
As the piece to get the extra enter that you needed for Kayasumi, which was pretty good, actually. Like, it made things really annoying. As the Aya player, where I'm trying to strangle the opponent on resources, specifically cards in hand and enter on the field, it was like I saw the GGG come out and I was like, oh, so I'm going to color screw, but I'm not going to be able to successfully enter a screw this game. So I had to work my game plan around that. But it was a close game. It was very cool.
Yeah.
Anyways, so let's talk about the GP.
Let's talk about the Grand Prix coming up in Vegas in July.
July 22nd. We don't know any more details yet still. Don't know the hotel. Don't know how to qualify. Don't know how many rounds it is. Don't know any of
We
those
literally
things.
know the date and the city.
In the city. So we've narrowed it down in America to a city.
To a city.
We'll find out more again as it comes forward. We'll try to tell you guys about it. But I have prepped a little bit of some slides here. Specifically, Tiffany, I know that you are you're figuring out what kind of deck you want to play and what you're going to be pushing forward. So this is sort of a cheat sheet to anyone who's like, I know what deck I like and I want to play this deck, but I also want to know what other people are going to play and how to prep against it, right? This is a little cheat sheet to let you know what you probably need to be aware of. If not, it's like the main thing here. So
Yes.
I have down here some tiers, right? Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. Tiffany, can you read them off for me?
Tier 1, Tier 2, until Tier 3?
Yeah.
Well, Tier 1, we've got the blue control decks. This is like blue-black or white-blue-black, Atomic Deus, and DXM.
Yes.
For Tier 2, we've got blue base tempo, white aggro, dash Hirana, Enterburn, and taxes. And for Tier 3, we've got green enter, white midrange, black midrange, and red midrange. I feel like
A lot of mid-range.
you have put midrange in Tier 3.
I have a reasoning for that. Now I'll describe
we'll
it
get that into other
in a
parts.
bit at some point. But these are what I think is probably your tiers, but tiersing and Wixoss is weird, right? So all of these decks are probably pretty capable of beating each other or having some lopsided representation. Like, who knows? The Dash Hirana is going to just be like 20 people are going to bring it. And
Right.
so even though maybe the archetype itself performs poorly, it still ends up getting top 16 representation just out of sheer representation. You know, so like, you know, Wixoss is weird like that, but generally I think these are sort of the power levels and also what you need to be prepping against.
All right, sounds good. So, yep, once again, this is our part one of our three-part series for what we're thinking you will be seeing, what you most likely, in our opinion, you may see at the GP. And if you want to keep up with the series, or if you want to, you know, hang out with us as we do our Versus series, make sure that you subscribe.
Yeah, so I wanted to none of these are in order, by the way. So none of these are in like tier order because I don't think again I don't think the tiers matter all that
So
much.
it's not really a tier, it's just more like collection 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, it's more like
Selection 1.
power levels you need to be aware of, right? Like I don't think it's crazy to say that the atomic deck is probably generally more powerful than others. That doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't straight up lose to like some of these other decks. Like they might have a super lopsided matchup. Like Dash Hirana, which is going to be the first one we talk about, is a crazy new deck that you'll have to worry about in set 9. It cannot exist until set 9, so I know you guys might want to try this out now. If you want to prep against it, you know, there's people on the card game Discord that you can play against. But it is the future of aggro decks. In the fact that it's kind of crazy. So we've got for all of these, we've basically got 3 pros and 3 cons to the deck. These are real considerations to think about before you go into it, and also things you can take advantage of your opponent if they're playing this. So what are our pros and cons?
Looks like our pros is that it's the fastest deck. It also does not depend on your opponent's strategy, and it is easy to pilot.
Yes, all those things are true.
And then the cons is that it has no deck smoothing. It is also draw dependent, and it burns out quickly.
Yes.
So let's start with the pros. What do you mean? I mean, fastest deck I think is kind of self-explanatory.
Yes.
If you've practiced against it before, or if you've read about it, this is a deck that goes blazing fast,
Yeah.
which makes a lot of sense for, you know, typical red aggro. But what do you mean when it says that it doesn't depend on whatever the opponent's doing?
Well, before we go into that, let me explain how fast it goes, right?
Okay.
In Wecross, in set 1, we're talking about when Hirana was top dog, right? You could win the game consistently on turn 4 with Hirana, and sometimes, very rarely, on turn 3, right? Dash Hirana wins on turn 3 every time,
Oh my goodness.
or it loses.
That's really fast considering that we're used to seeing games go to like turn 7.
The crazy thing is, some builds of Dash Hirana can offer 9 damage on turn 3, period. That's enough to kill you with an extra damage.
Yeah. That's a lot. I hope you got a lot of guards.
Yeah, it's nuts. So when I say it's the fastest deck, I don't mean that as it is the fastest deck that the format has ever seen.
So if you never want to go to time.
You will never go to time. You will go on turn 3 every time. And then you could scoop if you want, because if you don't win by turn 3, you probably don't win.
Oh my goodness.
That's not a joke. That's a serious answer. It doesn't matter what your opponent's strategy is.
Yeah, what's that about?
Who cares if your opponent's playing Tama and doing this fancy thing where they can swing with Tama 3 times in a row? Who cares if Lion is going to, on turn 4, do its endless punchline and try to attack 3 times in a row? Who cares if the opponent is going to be trying to play an Exi on turn 3 if you kill them before they have their turn 3? That's what I mean. Like, it deploys its own
too
game
fast
plan,
to care.
and it does not care about your opponent's game plan. It's going to win or lose regardless of your opponent's game plan.
Well, what about that makes it easy to pilot then?
You do the same thing every single game, which is basically you play turn 1 some damage, turn 2 some damage, you prep up cards in your hand during the opponent's turn 2 defense step. You try to pave the way to blow out any guards that you might have in it with some discard, right? Some targeted discard that allows you to get guards. And then on turn 3, you load up your hand, load up your Elrig deck, load up your pieces, and you go to attack step, offering 9 damage on turn 3 every game.
God, that's so much.
Yes.
That's very intimidating. So what do you mean by deck smoothing? Are you talking about that there's no sort of like way for you to fix your hand or recur things from the trash?
Yeah, there's no way to fix your hand, recur things from the trash. There's ways to draw cards from your deck. You will always be able. That's part of Dash Hirana is to load up its hand prior to its turn 3 push. But you have no way to really manipulate what it is. So there are going to be a non-zero number of games where you're like, I drew 30 cards in between my turn 1 and turn 3, and none of the key pieces were there, and I lost that game. Like it's gonna happen in non-zero number times. I don't know what the number actually is. I haven't tested it, but I would say anywhere from if it's the high end, probably 10%. If it's the low end, 5%. Now, I mean that's the power. That's the risky play, paying such a high end power deck. Like it's risky. But if you go on a hot streak, you could get it, right?
I mean, it's also risky that it burns out quickly, huh?
It is correct, right? So if your opponent does somehow manage to survive, maybe they get lucky with their defensive bursts, maybe they have the correct L-Rig deck configured to basically be like, oh, no, I won't die, right? And it is possible to build your L-Rig deck. It's just, it takes a lot of L-Rig. We're not just talking about a 3-stop. You've got to have a 3-stop, probably a very defensive board, defensive life bursts, and also potentially a 0-cost way to put another defense thing out there, like maybe Can't Stop Pretty or something like that, right? Or another assist maybe that's like Madoka Dub, that allows you to stop an extra point of damage. And like if the opponent then blows out all of their assists to stop you and they manage to survive at 1 life cloth or 0 life cloth, they have a chance to win. You might not have any more push anymore.
Right. All right. So let's take a look at this is sort of what you're thinking of for
the center, right?
For the center
is Hirana. You'll notice there's a gap in space here, sort of on the slide, to be like, because I was like, ooh, maybe you could do Tama, or maybe you could do this other thing as your center. And the more and more I looked at it, the more I was like, nope, Hirana's literally the only one that offers what Dash Hirana needs in order to function.
I mean, it is called Dash Hirana,
right? But it just has it has the right amount of things. One, it's in red, which is good, right? You could do this outside of red, I suppose, but you probably want to be in red. The second thing is it loads up your hand. That's something that I wanted maybe to even put Towel on here as one of those things, because Towel lets you basically draw 3 cards for no enter. And this allows you to draw 1 card when it enters, but also enter charges you 1, which means that you can be a little bit lower to the ground with your resources, right, for your kill turn. But the most important part for that is Hirana's once per game, which says it deals an extra damage when it attacks. So,
well, that's not exactly what it says, but yes.
Yeah. I'm shortcutting here. You can discard a guard to stop it. But the whole thing is, right, like, because you're loading up on doing so much damage turn 3, you're really not supplying with your opponent's enter very much during the course of that game. So you're minimizing the chance that they can really even do assists to stop you, right? Like, for example, Dea's Shield costs, to stop 3 damage, costs 6 enter. Your opponent might not be able to afford that if you're just basically have only given them 3 enter prior to that. So the fact that this can deal a damage on the L-Rig attack for that turn 3 and stack all that damage on a single turn before the opponent can react or build up their defenses for it matters.
Okay. So now we've also got the Tama Aura as the assist of choice, and Entwined Supremacy. I've actually become quite the fan of Entwined Supremacy.
Yes.
As we've been playing with it.
And for our audio listeners, Tiffany, do you mind reading that? Tama Aura is a new card coming out in set 8.
All right. So Tama Aura is a level 2 Larig assist. It's got main phase timing with the enter ability. Target Larig on your field gains auto once a turn. When this Larig attacks, up it, and it loses its abilities until end of turn. Correct.
And how much does its grow cost?
It is 0.
0. Low to the ground.
Free. Wow, that's nice. It kind of reminds me of Yuka Yuka's cost, because Yuka Yuka is also very cheap when it comes to growing as a Larig.
Yeah, and this is a main phase thing where it basically gives your ability to be Tama, and you get to attack an extra time, which is more L-Rig damage.
Yeah, Tama does like attacking multiple times.
Yep.
And then we've also got Entwined Supremacy, which is a piece. It costs 1 red with main phase timing. And it says target level 3 Lurig on your field gains the following ability until end of turn. Auto, once a turn, when this Lurig attacks, crush one of your opponent's life cloth. If the opponent chooses to use a life burst on that card, you may pay 2 colorless. If you do, that card's life burst does not activate.
We did talk about sort of like this being loaded, right? Most life bursts stop Signy from attacking, so by the time you're using this, it probably doesn't matter.
Sure. Yeah. I have become a big fan of this though. Like even if you can pay for like the for it to not use its abilities or whatever, you're still crushing a life cloth for 1.
Exactly.
I do like it a lot. Very rare.
And so the next slide then, so this just slide talks about just how much we're adding to the damage, right? So if you do it in your head right now, you've got Hirana's once per game, Hirana's second attack because of Tama's attack. We've got Hirana's damage itself as well as the Entwined Supremacy. That's 4 damage on
right
one
there.
turn with
And that's
an
all
Elrig
Lurig
attack.
damage.
Correct. You guards.
Well, it's three Lurig damage and a piece that you can't do anything. Like you have to crush a life cloth.
Yep, that's correct.
So, and the likelihood that your opponent has 3 guards in their hand at once is pretty low.
Yep. And so let's talk about the next slide, which has on your screen, dear viewers, you'll see the right one, but I actually put the wrong Ray on there, so ignore that, Tiffany. But the more important one is the new card coming out in set 9 called Flathrow.
Flathrow? Is that this big one with the Japanese letters?
Yeah, it's Flathrow.
Flathrow?
Yeah, Flamthrow. What is that short for?
Stop it. Is it flamethrower?
It's a flamethrower. It's a weapon Signy.
And one of these days I'm gonna make a foods deck and I'm gonna make an object deck and I'm gonna wreck with them both.
Yeah, you can
Mark my words.
It can just be guns.
Guns and salad.
Guns and salad. That's my brand.
And wine and like wine cellars
And wine cellar.
and blankets.
Oh, you should not be playing with guns and wine cellars.
Well, yeah.
Safety first, dear selectors.
Oh my goodness. All right.
Coming from me,
that,
right?
Skipping beyond that. All right. So we got flamethrower. It says auto. At the start of your attack phase, you may discard all cards from your hand. If 6 or more cards are discarded this way, crush one of your opponent's life cloth. Auto. When this Signy attacks, if you have 0 cards in your hand, you may pay 2 red. If you do, this Signy gains Assassin until end of turn. And because this is the Japanese card, its catchphrase is, I can't stop the captain.
Can't stop the captain.
Can't stop the captain. This does sound very, very, very powerful. I mean, anytime that you can get a life cloth crush
For free. I know it costs 6 cards, but
but you anytime that you can do that outside of the field and outside of your Lurig deck, it's basically free.
yeah.
Like that's always worth it. Because how do you win the game? Crushing 7 life cloth.
And this
Actually crushing 7 life cloth and
then hit one more
knockout.
damage. But you remember the last thing that you're doing on your turn is attacking with Hirana. Like Hirana's Elrig damage is the last one, which means that you can kill. This is also one of the few ways the deck can potentially win the next turn, because the next turn you probably have some amount of enter, and also you probably have 0 cards because you blew all your cards on turn 3, so it probably has Assassin. But it's one of the few ways that you can do it. And there's a limited number in your deck. You're probably going to see 3 in the opponent's deck, not 4, just because having 2 of these is not useful. Having 1 of these is the right number. And so yeah, it's crazy. It's a lot of damage. I mean, you got again the risk here. You crush the life cloth right at the beginning of the attack step, which means like, what if they hit an Akufuku? Sad beans.
Yeah, that would be disappointing, but the fact still remains, like, that's still a free life cloth.
Yeah, it's also
crush.
50-50, right? Like, you also could just hit, like...
I mean, I'm gonna be honest, when we were playing at our locals this weekend, there was a game I did not hit a single life.
You could just hit a
life
monument
burst.
and be like, well, that was useful.
It
I
was
have
very
blue enter I'll never
frustrating.
use now.
I literally threatened to flip the table. I was very upset. All right, what else do we have? We've got Daji, Crimson Evil Queen.
Dodgy, it's a D-A.
Daji?
Dodgy, yeah.
Sure. Daji?
I
Daji?
think it's actual demon from some lore and comment down below if you know what demon
Yeah,
it is.
let it, as always, you're more than welcome to there. You know what? I quit.
All right, I got you. So
No, wait, let me finish. Let me finish. You are more than welcome to correct our pronunciations in the comment section down below. I would personally find it very helpful because clearly I struggle.
struggle bus. Well, so this demon's pretty cool. It has a couple things going for it. It's been around forever. I think it's actually been around since set 2. Yeah, set 2. So it's been around forever. Just probably never played it. It is not a good card. I want to be clear here, but it is good in this deck. What it can do is once per turn, as an auto, when one of your life cloth is crushed, you get to draw a card. Okay. When it enters, however, you can crush a life cloth. Now remember, crushing a life cloth will give you a free ability. It will also give you 1 enter to work with, and it will also draw you a card when this is out on the field.
Sounds risky, though.
Absolutely, but you're not trying to win on turn 4. You're trying to win on turn 3. You know, see what I'm saying? Life cloth is just unused resources at that point.
I suppose so.
So if you're saying I'm going to win on turn 3 and I have 3 life cloth left, might as well use them. Because the life cloth will probably give you good effects. The second ability isn't worthwhile, but let's look at the life burst on this. Advantage target Signy with 8,000 power or less. It plays into what life bursts you're trying to hit as well.
Right.
Free removal.
Yes. And that also goes for the little witchy card. Which one is this one?
I can't remember. Daji or something like that is her name.
No. The card that's the crimson something.
Yeah, I remember. I just don't remember the card's name itself.
Oh, okay.
But it's the vanilla level 2 red Signy where if it's got a life burst of you may pay colorless if you do vanish target Signy on your opponent's field.
It's pretty great because it just says vanish target Signy.
Yeah,
that can be anything.
You know, we like ourselves an eternal influence, right? Mm-hmm. Eternal influence, you gotta exceed 4 and do it. This just does it. You know,
we do like that. Would have been really useful though during the locals.
And then so you've got your level 2 of choice here. It's probably either Ray, which discards your opponent to randomly, or you can play it's Mika Mika. And Mika Mika allows you to, for 3 enter, spin something to the bottom of the deck, but you also you can discard some cards from your hand. And if you do, you get to look at the opponent's hand and pull any card out of it, which means you can snipe guards.
Yeah, we do like that.
Yeah, the idea is with your level 2, you're trying to not only your extra level 2, not your Tama level 2, but your extra level 2, you're trying to snipe some guards out of your opponent's hands, and also you're trying to draw cards.
All right. So what is on this side? This looks like the whole...
Just an example deck here that you guys can use. So
you've got 2 blue cards in here. What are those for?
Well, if you zoom into them like some extreme amount,
then it becomes pixelated. And
it becomes pixelated. Yeah. So I'll explain the general idea of the deck. You guys are going to need to use the artwork to explain the deck. I'm not going to go over every single card in it. But the thing is those life bursts that you see all along the bottom, the Tristans and that green or that blue called low light, they all have the same life burst, which is basically draw 3.
Okay.
So so let's say you Daja
that goes
crush
back
it.
into like the how the deck needs draw.
Yep.
So you're putting that in your life burst.
So yeah, if you Daja crush it, you'll draw 1 card from Daja, and then you'll draw 3 cards from this.
Okay.
Which will, and it's also search 5, draw 3. So it's you do get a little bit of a digger there.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
You'll see the rest of the deck is just all removal, right? You've got
Rommel, Lancelot's, Hera is very classic.
Yeah, I'm having trouble zooming into mine for some reason. But there's also some other ones that you might not notice before. Zapar is one that's been around forever but never really been used. Basically, it says that you can you can sacrifice a red Signy on your field, and if you do, it does a Rommel's job. But because you've got so much draw to replace the card that you're sacrificing, you really don't care. It's just free compared to Rommel's 1 cost. Some Eternal Influence to help you get a little bit later in the game. You've got some Heras, which are basically just Lancelots, right? Some other basic level 1s that don't really do much. And also there's Halbert, which is coming out in the next set. Halbert allows you to basically pay 4 enter if the opponent targets a Signy you control, and then you can crush one of the opponent's life cloth.
All right.
So just some more reach.
Gotcha. Very cool. So that's Dash Hirana. Let's move on to some blue control decks. Now, this is kind of more like a blanket blue control sort of situation. Is that right?
Yeah. So the blue control decks are, you've got some options here, right? Generally speaking, you're going to see 2 different versions. You're going to see a blue black control deck and probably a blue white black control deck. In some rare cases, you might see blue green black or blue white green sort of control decks. The green's for Mel, by the way. It's always going to be for Mel. Because Mel's assist line allows you to prevent damage, and preventing damage is better than anything else because let's say Tama attacks twice. Who cares that you stop some Signies? You stop 3 Signies. You weren't going to take 3 damage from the Signies anyways. But with Mel preventing damage, you're going to stop all of those Tamas attacks. So yeah, you might see some Mel around to bring green into this, but generally speaking, it's going to be a blue black or blue white black control deck.
All right. So, of course, there are pros and cons to blue control decks. The pros are that they are flexible. You do have a lot of different options here, as we just went over. Like, there's color variations, there's also, like, strat variations, different packages that you can throw into your deck and kind of make it a little bit more, like, tweaked to what you would want.
Yeah, you can be like, I'm prepping against aggro, or I'm prepping against the control mirror matchup. You have a lot of options to go into.
It also has a 50% win rate.
Pretty much across the board, yeah.
Now, is that a good thing? Because 50% is kind of like, it's a tween cross-up.
Yeah, we can talk about that after.
Toss-up.
A tween toss-up. We can talk about that in a second after we finish through the things, but I think for this, it is a good thing.
All right. And it comes with deck smoothing, unlike Dash Hirana.
Yeah, you have a lot of ways to basically decide what card you want to have in your hand at any point in time.
Now, of course, this comes with cons, such as it's slow.
Yes, it is slow.
Which, if you've ever played against a control deck, or if you've played a control deck, you know that it is painfully slow compared to some of the other decks. The mistakes cost games, as in, like, any sort of misplays that you might come across, they are, they're more dire in their consequences because of the way that the deck is sort of, like, balanced.
Yes.
It's also very enter hungry. There's going to be a lot of costs associated with this deck, such outside of just paying for your assists. There's going to be things like spells, abilities, removals are going to be costing you certain enter. And this seems typical, but for blue decks, it hits a little bit different because it's harder to build in better resource management into blue control decks.
Yeah, and if we dive into those a little bit, right? So the flexibility we pretty much explained already. You can put packages in there to basically curtail your bad matchups however you'd like, and strengthen them up. But the 50% win rate, let's talk about that, right? Mm-hmm. So if you said, Andrew, what deck do you want to bring to the locals? You got 3 rounds. I'm probably going to try to bring something that I think this is probably pretty good against the field that I'm playing against. I think currently there's a lot of aggro, so I probably want to counter it with my tempo deck or something, right? And then I'd want some lopsided matches. And if it doesn't work, it's a locals, whatever, right? Mm-hmm. In a GP, where the field is so unknown and wide, at that point, I probably want something that has a more across the board win rate, right? And these unicorns of being like, I found the deck that beats every single other deck, right? These oh god, what are they called? The old Squadron Hawk decks from Magic the Gathering. Yeah. Kago, and then Cobblade eventually, which grew out of it, right? The idea that you found the thing that cracked the meta is so difficult to find. I think genuinely,
well, especially in Wixoss, like we've like kind of, I say we, but you have really cracked the numbers over the past like year or two that the game has been out, and like we're looking at Olympic percentages, like splitting hairs in terms of like what can kind of get the upper hand.
Yeah.
And 50% is not bad.
I
when
think,
you put it into perspective like that.
I think literally The couple times that I've seen someone crack the meta has been when we saw Madoka do it that one time in the ceremony, because it had all the elements needed to beat Hirana, basically. And then I think Anthony came pretty close with his Nova deck.
Shouts out to you, Anthony.
It actually had like basically ways to beat most decks. Just it was very, very, very hard to do.
Yes, I think that the meta is a lot wider now.
Yes.
Because it's one of those. It's the type of card game that like the cards build on top of each other, so your library is ever expanding, which also makes it very hard to kind of make a deck that beats everything.
Yeah.
Which is why a 50% win rate is particularly good.
Right, because if you were like, so my deck is almost 50-50 against everything, but you know what? I'm probably a better player than most people, right? I know that's not, I'm not saying anything about me. I'm saying literally if you're like, I think I'm a better player than most people, and I can leverage that to my advantage. I can see outs that most people can't.
You can see the matrix.
Then you could be like,
deck.
yeah. Then you could be like, I can change that 50% to 53%, and that nudges it, right? You said Olympic advantages.
Yes.
Deck smoothing, I think, is self-evident. Like, if you're up against a Dasher on a deck, you probably want to find your Exias. And so being able to find Exias quickly is a way is an advantage. As far as the things that are the cons, right? Like slow is not just a con in terms of it takes mental tax and like it drags on. You might go to time and then do a double loss.
That is the traditional rules of Wixoss, is that if you run out of time and neither you nor your opponent have clearly won the game, as in like you have been knocked out, or vice versa, it's a double loss.
Over the years, I've seen so many of my friends who are really good at their various card games not get top placement because their end results was I went 10-0-2, and it was because they didn't lose the 2, they drew 2.
Oh, it's a draw 2.
So they just those things could have been a win if they got 10 more minutes, but they didn't have 10 more minutes.
Yeah, and I don't think that this is going to be the game that, like, in other games it'll, like, do a thing where, like, you go to time, and then you either, like, go to turns, or you get, like, 5 minutes, and then, like, that's it. But in most of the ceremonies that we've played, it's been double losses.
Yeah, and I mean, the joke that, like, me and Anthony used to do with our Nova decks, right, which is one of the slowest decks, we go to, like, turn 12 sometimes, right?
Yeah, it's
like,
crazy.
It was funny because, in our locals, when we were the Nova deck, we generally were one of the first people to finish the
you guys
round.
are rushing.
And it's because we knew the deck so well that we could perform our turns very quickly, and we trained ourselves to move quickly because of the double losses.
Yes.
So if you're not confident that you can move quickly, right? If you're not confident that you can look at a card on the opponent's field, not have to ask to read it, then maybe don't.
That does
maybe
take
don't play
up
this.
Time.
Yeah, some other things are that this is mistakes cost games, right? We talked about this a little bit. Like, it's just the gravity of your mistake can really cost you. Again, if you're playing a 50% win rate, any mistake you make can tank it.
Yeah.
And then the last one is enter hungry, and it's not just because they have a lot of enter costs. They might not actually have a ton of enter costs. Like, yeah, Tama costs a bit to swing, right? But if they're managing their enter well, they should be okay. The truth is, when you go to turn 7, you just have less enter because you have less life cloth than less life cloth blowing up than if you were going to turn 5.
That is true too.
So you just have less to work with for a longer time.
So what do you think the makeup of like a blue control deck would be?
So there's 2 slides here because there's a lot of, again, flexible options for your center. Tamago, we've talked to ad nauseum about. Tama, we've talked to ad nauseum about. But there's one here that is a new one that's coming out in set 8 that I think is probably a pretty okay choice. It's Yuka Yuka.
I actually have really started to like Yuki Yuka, like even as an assist. So I'm pretty excited to see what she's going to do as a center.
And what does she do as a center, by the way?
Well, at a level 3 Yuka Yuka, auto, whenever a Signy on your opponent's field attacks, that Signy loses its abilities until end of turn unless your opponent pays 1 colorless, or just one of anything.
It's actually really good against aggro.
Its enter ability is return target Signy on your opponent's field to its owner's hand. Action, once a game, do the following 3 times. Unless your opponent discards a card or pays 1, you look at the top 3 cards of your deck. Add up to 1 card from among them to your hand and put the rest on the bottom of your deck in any order.
Deck smoothing, defensive stuff. It's got a lot of options here.
This is a really flexible center.
Yeah.
And you can definitely see like the control aspect of that.
Yep. Probably
I'm
wants to be in
excited.
a deck that's enter starving, and control can be one of those things.
For sure.
The other ones are Madoka Vogue 3, which is totally an option as well, and then Deus 3. Deus just comes with a lot of resources available.
Look at
Deck
Madoka.
selection.
She's so pretty.
Yeah.
Or Madoka, whichever you prefer.
So those are your options for your basically what you can choose to make your control deck based off of. Looking at our pieces, you really basically have the choice between one of these two pieces, and this will define your assist archetypes, right?
Not both.
Not both. You can't do both. Summer Lives Blues requests that you have 2 blue assists, and then the next one is Ultra Superheroes.
Ultra Superheroes.
You want to read that, Tiff?
Sure. This is a piece. It costs 1 colorless. It's blue aligned, but it costs 1 colorless. It says it's a Dream Team use condition, so you have 3 Lyrigs on your field with 3 or more different colors among all members. If there is a white Lyrig on your field, look at the top 5 cards of your deck, add up to 2 cards from among them to your hand, and the rest at the bottom of your deck in any order. Then, if there is a red Lyrig on your field, vanish target Signy on your opponent's field with 12,000 or less. Then, if there is a black Lyrig on your field, put the top 10 cards of your opponent's deck into their trash. Woof.
Yeah, so you can't do all 3 effects because it's a blue piece. We're not Japan, so we don't have the free color.
We don't have the free colors yet.
So you are spending 1 colorless to, in this control deck specifically, spending 1 colorless to mill your opponent 10. Look at the top 5, grab 2. And that is so much value.
That is a lot of value.
You guys, if you don't know this card, get used to it. It's going to be here for another year. This is like one of those Exia level cards where you're like, this is...
You better learn it now because it's going to be around.
It's going to be around. So mill 10, that's damage on your opponent. And then look at the top 5. It doesn't say non-guard, by the way. So
oh, look at that.
You can get any cards. The top, whatever your best 2 is for the scenario, all for the low cost of 1 enter
and a blue Lyrig.
Yeah, but I mean, and this is not that hard to be like, oh,
no,
I want to be control. I want discard. I'm in blue
control. Yeah, exactly.
And it's like funny that we mentioned blue control and then have Tama and these other black Elrigs as the center. Again, your deck can be a blue control deck without actually having to play that center.
Ooh, that is the fun of Wixoss.
Yeah. So your early game, on this side is going to be that it's going to be like early discard. And after that, you've got your monomins, you've got your random drains. And then if you've got your Exias and your Koelas to sort of be your late game, this is your late game defense. So you're starting your early games to basically be ruin the opponent's sort of like day, their resources, and then you're going to head and you're going to also defense up your stuff at some point, probably on turn 3, right? So that's a classic sort of blue stuff that you would be normally doing. Following that, on your turn 3 step, thereabouts, turn 3, turn 2, whatever, you're going to be looking at casting like Super Celestia Saber at some point. And that will allow you to bring back Exias, maybe bring back Phalaris's to do damage, but I put down a level 1 here. It's basically to fill out your fields correctly, fix your enter.
Because as we've discussed before, your level 1s are actually incredibly important because they can be played at any time of the game.
Yep. And you're going to bring back a guard. This is just allowing you to just be like, my outs against aggro is I'm minimizing the damage constantly.
I mean, especially with Dash Hirana, like, ugh.
Yeah, you got
to be prepared for those low rig attacks somehow, because you ain't stopping the Signy stuff.
Right, and remember, the guard can stop Hirana's once per game ability. It allows you to ditch a guard for it.
Yep.
So having 2 guards in that scenario is not a terrible idea. Plus, it's going to attack twice with Tama anyway, so you needed those guards anyways. So that's the early game of this deck, and then the late game is basically like, I'm going to do some extra damage, right? Akino in this scenario for this slide is doing...
Akino, bound for tomorrow.
Yeah, it's basically you can pay an enter and trash one of your white Signy, and then you can bounce an opponent's Signy to their hand. And then Tama allows you to do extra damage on the attacks. Basically, your L rig is going to help you do some extra. If it was Deus, it would do the same thing. It's a soul that does damage. You're going to be milling the opponent out probably as some extra damage as well. Maybe not.
Yeah, crushing, or I guess trashing a life cloth through mill.
Yeah, refresh.
That's still a life cloth lost for your opponent. It's completely valid.
So the slide here is just basically it's basically your stock standard Tama control deck here. It's going to be using all the cards that I showed you before. There's really the only real new card that you're adding in here is going to be your ultra superheroes, right? So if you watched our previous breakdowns on decks, this is it using its clock, its Tama based clock, as well as its ability to filter through its deck, constantly have guards, constantly mitigate damage, constantly try to make the opponent low on resources through discard and maybe some enter starving, right? Through Gay Bog and stuff like that, which will allow you to trash the opponent's stuff, so depriving them of enter. The only real change aside from ultra superheroes is that you have some more freedom in choosing how you get your last bits of damage in. So Nanashi is also going to be an option to allow you to do that. Nanashi is a new set 9. Yeah, set 9. Elrig, or set 9, excuse me, not Elrig, set 9 Signy. That's level 3. And says when it attacks, I'm shortcutting here. When it attacks, you target 2 of your opponent's Signy and give them negative 3,000 each, which we're in a world now where there's a lot of monomins running around, and negative 3,000 kills monomins. So if the opponent...
It kills a lot of things.
Right. So if the opponent...
It kills Ramels, it kills Haniels, it kills monomins. It'll kill Zhao's because it's a level 3.
Yeah.
It kills a lot of things.
Yeah. So
especially on like the lower end, like if we're just like thinking about like,
it kills Chirins even. That's a level 2 that enter charges, It kills a lot of things, and so it's not unheard of to be like, I'm gonna ditch this opponent's guard. I'm gonna put Monomin down, and now I'm attacking. And then they go, cool, Nanashi, open up 2 lanes for free, 0 enter. Like I said, these decks are enter hungry, so they might need some of these end game pieces that are no enter. So that's basically your rundown of your blue control decks.
Loves it.
Yeah.
So what do we got now? Now we're moving into blue tempo decks.
Yeah, what are the pros and cons of the blue tempo deck?
The pros are tons of card advantage, lots of resource control, and a proactive game plan. The cons are it's hard to close out games, some decks ignore its strategies, and it's tough to 50-50. So when we talk about card advantage for blue tempo decks, that means that it's literally cards in your hand. Like, you're probably going to be drawing a lot of cards. You might be having your opponent discard cards, so now you're ahead of them with that tempo. Maybe not so much in the enter, but definitely things on the field as well.
Well, if you're restricting their resources, right? Like, that's a way to get ahead on the enter game. It's not necessarily, I'm enter charging. It can also be like, I'm enter normally and you have no enter.
Yeah, exactly. So when we say card advantage for blue tempo, or just tempo decks in general, it just means that you have more cards than your opponent does. Whether that's in the deck, in the hand, in the enter, in the life cloth, and the wherever, like that all counts as card advantage.
Yeah.
Lots of resource control. Now, how would you describe blue tempo having lots of resource control?
So the enter starve, right? That's one of the less obvious options, right? When you tax your opponent, that is basically enter burning. When you are resource denying them, including stuff like their hand with discard. Some lesser versions of resource denying that you might not recognize is also deck, right? Like if let's say you refresh them, right? How many cards are in their trash?
0.
Do some decks...
Well, technically 1, but that's from the life cloth.
Yeah, and plus anything in their enter if they can spend it and get it in there. The flip side to that is, so you strengthen decks. Is there some decks that use the deck basically as a second hand, and that's a way to sort of control what's going in there too with resource advantagement.
Right. And then we also say that tempo decks have a proactive game plan, meaning that it's not so much reactive as it is proactive, meaning that you're always doing something to further your own interest in the game, which is different from things like control and from aggro. And if you want more information on some of our deck archetypes,
Yeah, archetypes.
then we have a couple podcasts on those as well, which you're more than welcome to check out.
Yeah, so the proactive game plan here is actually pretty relevant, right? Unlike a slow deck like a control deck, right, that's dependent on your opponent, this can match the speed of your opponent's game plan, but it also can it can do its own thing. So if the opponent starts putting down something that's very wacky and is eventually going to win, and you got really no answer for it, player removal is an answer to it. And I don't mean like throw your opponent out the window or something. I mean, if you just go, okay, cool, I'm going to end this game by beating you.
Right.
You don't have to really care about their cool, wacky combo that's going to inevitably win, because they can't win because they lost.
Because they lost. Exactly. So moving on to the cons on that note, it is hard to close out games as a tempo deck.
Yeah. So the reason for that being is because they've got to devote so much resources to disrupting the opponent also. And in moving their own game plan forward, they have less resources to devote towards making it so that way they can have firepower, basically removal, right? So for example, this is the hypergeometric calculator at work here.
Ooh.
But if you're an aggro deck and you have less card draw, the way to make sure that you have lane openers is put more lane openers in your deck, right? If you have 30 lane openers, you've got a pretty good chance of drawing lane openers, regardless of how little card draw you have. If you have more card draw, you use less, right? Because you're like, well, I'm going to see 2/3 of my deck, 3/3 of my deck. Almost every game I got to like 2 cards left. If you're like, I'm going to see my entire deck, then that means that you can put 10 lane openers in your deck and then be like, I'll see all of them because I'll draw all of them. That does mean that you have a finite amount of lane openers though. So if the opponent puts down Exias and makes it so that's awkward, pays your weird taxes and is able to skirt around what you're doing, then you might be like, I'm literally out. I have no way to win this game.
Yeah, now we're just, playing...
we can circle the drain.
Yeah, circle the drain. What is it called when Pokemon run out of moves?
Oh, struggle?
Yeah, you just struggle.
Yeah, that's it.
It can also be difficult when decks are ignoring the blue tempo strategies. Like, obviously, there's a couple different ways that you can make your blue tempo work for you, and you're going to be fancy about it, and you're going to be smart about it, and then Dasharon is just going to come in and be like, I don't really care what you're doing.
Yeah, I'm going to just
punch you in the face.
This is also worth shouting out green here. It gets so few areas that you can shout it out.
#justice for green.
So I'm gonna shout it out here. Green black specifically, but also like green white does a wonderful job of just being like, I don't care if you try to resource control me, it's not gonna work. I have all the enter in the world to work with, and I have all of the cards that I can bring back from my trash to work with. You got nothing on me, right? Green can't do it alone, but basically pair it with any other color and it can do it.
Right. It's a really good support color. One day.
Yeah.
So it would be a good main color.
So it's worth shouting out there,
What does tough to 50-50 mean?
It means that it doesn't always have even matchups across the board. It has kind of lopsided matchups. It either really wins or it really doesn't.
That does make sense. Yeah, tempo is such a, everything about it has to be super balanced, including how you plan out your turns and play through your game as a tempo player.
Yeah.
Everything has to be very, very precise. That's coming from me, a person that played a crap ton of tempo.
Yeah, totally.
Speaking of, you will be familiar with some of the cards on this slide.
Yep.
Because we have talked about Umar as a center at length, because I had been playing that a lot. And Umar is definitely a tempo center.
Yes, and Aya is another tempo center. I think Aya is probably slightly better than Umir, as much as I hate to admit it.
No, I would agree with that.
Umir has attacks that can potentially vanish, but that kind of goes against what the deck's trying to do, because it's also trying to enter deprive and Signy deprive, so giving your opponent the choice of it is difficult. And also, Aya makes up for its kind of enter hungriness by having coins, and the coins actually matter here. So I think it's probably the premier tempo deck I would run. Ray is also a choice, I suppose, but I didn't put it on here because I don't respect it, which is going to draw me some hate.
Wow.
It's going to draw me some hate. I know there's some viewers who really like Ray, and I just baited them all in the comments now.
If you are a Ray Center player,
Tell me why I'm wrong.
Yeah, tell Andrew why he's wrong in the comment section down below. I would also like to know.
Yuki Yuka is also on here.
Yeah, which we've mentioned before. As I was reading that card earlier, I was like, wow, that actually kind of sounds like a better Umer somehow.
It taxes your opponents pretty well.
Yes.
So I like it as one of those options too. So here's the sort of first part of the game and the second part of the game later down the line. We've got Monomin. Your Monomin represents, hey, I'm going to discard you now.
Yes. Monomin's great. It's been such a staple in the decks that we've been playing recently.
Totally.
If you haven't given Monomin a try in your deck, highly recommend it.
Yeah.
It's very easy to play.
It costs your own card advantage, so control decks don't necessarily love it. They play it sometimes.
Well, no, love it's not a control.
Haha, you got there. Got him.
Got him.
So that's the thing with Monomin, and then its late game is stuff like Yumi, which basically enter deprives your opponent, right? Because it trashes things.
Yukime?
Yukime. Thank you.
Yukime. Yes, Yukime puts things into the trash. It's also fun because you get to play a game of flip the top card of your opponent's deck, and maybe you get to draw a card, and if you have coins, and you get to basically draw a card.
Every time you have coins, you get to play the pretend game of being like, what's at the top of your get? Wow, let me go ahead and... Is it a level... Oh, it's a level 1. Who knew? I did actually use it last week, where I had only I had only 3 cards left in my deck, and I had to defend myself, so I went... I'm going to spend a coin to see what the top... That's a level 1. Let me try this again. Going to attack step. I'm going to guess a level 2. Darn it, I was wrong. I guess I don't get to draw a card, so I didn't X deck out.
I think you're so smart.
So,
we also got Monomin and Lancelot?
Yeah, so this is just worth shouting out. Like, you're not always going to see blue-white versions. You might see blue-red versions, too. So this is just sort of a shout-out to that. Just being like, yeah, it's a thing. You can just forego the idea of enter starving your opponent and play red and just be like, yeah, I'm not going to run out of removal. I'm just going to kick in here and do lots of damage. I'm just going to discard you to hell. That's what I'm doing. I'm discarding and damaging. My 2 favorite things.
Discard and damage.
Yeah.
Very good. So we've also got Bruno, Diabride, Gaybolg, Yukime, and what's this new one?
I think it's called... I can't remember the Japanese name for it. Sorry, it's not on the thing. But it's a jewel-focused one. So the idea here is pretty much this, right? Like, so what you've got represented here is just a ton of different ways to screw with your opponent's resources, right? There's a lot of discard in here. There's also a couple bits of enter starving or enter burning, depending on what color you end up leaning to. You can do red, you can do Yukime. The cool thing is, the thing that I called out here, remember Diabride is a jewel. And the thing here is a jewel as well. It does a very specific job. What is that job?
So it says constant. As long as there are 5 or more jewel signy in your trash, this signy gets plus 3,000 power. Auto, once a turn. Whenever a jewel signy on your field is vanished, your opponent discards a card. Action, once a turn. Discard a card. Look at the top 2 cards of your deck. Add a card from among them to your hand, and put the rest into your trash. Life Burst. Draw 2 cards. Put up to 1 jewel signy from your hand onto the field.
Yeah.
It's very well rounded.
It's all solid. All of that is solid. It's a solid, sparkly jewel.
It's very pretty. Look at the heart.
So, and Diabride is also a jewel that punishes the opponents for targeting. So
very popular.
Together, you end up with a pretty cool discard and enter burn thing that you can do.
Just a tiny package.
Yeah. So it's worth mentioning that that's something in the red blue world that you could be doing. But yeah, it's just you're just playing disruption in all its ways that you could possibly play disruption. And then what we're looking at in this next slide is the damage output for blue tempo decks.
Gotcha. So when we're talking about blue tempo decks, a common theme that you will have noticed is that it messes with your opponent's resources. So when you've got something like Madoka Break, and it says put target signy on opponent's field to the bottom of its owner's deck unless your opponent discards 2 cards. If they don't have any cards to discard, it's going to the bottom of their deck. We've also got Summer Lives Blues, which puts things to the bottom of the owner's deck, again, denying them some Ender. And we've got Eternal Influence, which will vanish Signies, but you can exceed the cost. Now, I am actually not familiar with Failure. That's a new one.
Yeah, go ahead and read it off for yourself.
All right, so Failure, it looks like it's a blue spell that costs 1 blue. And says, this spell can only be used if you have Tamago Memoria Natural Planet Queen, Nova Memoria Natural Planet, or Bang Memoria Jade Evil on your field, or if your opponent has one less card in their hand.
One or less
card in their hand. Target Signy on your opponent's field gets negative 8,000 power until end of turn. Life Burst, down target Signy on your opponent's field and freeze it. Your opponent discards a card. So that's the same as Random Drain.
Yes.
Or
well,
Random Bang.
random drains, Life Burst for sure.
Yeah, Life Burst. Okay. And then we also have...
And it's worth mentioning, again, you're playing a deck that's making them discard. They have one or less card in their hand. You don't need the beginning part in order to float off. They have one or less card in their hand, and you pay this, and you give something negative 8,000.
Yes.
Blue doesn't get a lot of ways to kill things. This is a way to do it. It likes it.
Yes. And then we've also got Daihoika. Wow. I'm really not confident I pronounced that.
I learned from Chair the other day.
Chair?
That is a giant squid.
Okay. Let's call it Giant Squid. Auto, at the beginning of your attack phase, discard up to 3 cards. Target Signy on your opponent's field gets negative 3,000 power for each card discarded this way until end of turn. So that is a total of 9,000.
Correct, if you want to discard that many.
If you want to discard that
But
many.
you have the option, which is great. You can do negative 3,000.
3.
You can be like, that's a cool monument on your side of the field.
No, it's not. Goodbye. Enter. If there are 3 or more blue Signy on your field, draw a card. Yeah. So that's also... that's just more ways that you're changing. I always think of tempo as like it's a meter.
Yep.
Like you're kind of always gauging how much your opponent has in each meter, meaning like a deck, a hand, a field, a life cloth, the enter, whatever. So this is just how you're going to be messing with those gauges more and more.
Yep.
All right. Moving along, here is a sample deck. What do you think?
You guys can pause it, read it, look at it, whatever. It's basically your normal Aya tempo, right? This is just going to do the job that you're looking to do. There's not really very many new cards on here, except for there is, in fact, some amount of the I don't remember how we pronounce it. The giant squid.
The giant squid.
That I promise we'll learn these at some point, but they haven't been used enough against us. That you've added some more damage to the main deck, which the deck kind of needed. But other than that, it's pretty much the exact same. There's also sneaky. I put an Aya Memoria in there as well. Aya Memoria basically costs 2 coins and is level 2. That's kind of one of the reasons why you'd use it, just because it's another coin outlet that you can use. And it basically hides a card from your opponent. So you can basically hide a guard with it and be like, you're not getting rid of this guard during my attack phase. And then you get to put it back. Like,
what do you mean it hides it?
It hides cards from your hand, basically. You put it face down under the Elrig.
Oh.
And then the opponent then proceeds with their turn, can't discard it, and then you bring it back to your hand, and you're like, oh, look, it's a card. So
that is so rude.
It's a way to sort of like one up discard.
Oh, Aya is a rude deck.
Aya is rude. That's true.
Rude.
So basically this is the normal Aya deck that you'd be playing. You guys can check out the Aya deck tech if you ever want to see more in depth. But yeah, it's just classic. Screw up your opponent's resources, gain me resources, and try to get damage when I can.
Yep.
And that's it. That's it for this one.
Those are the 3 decks that we're going to be going over today. Please make sure that you subscribe for the next video in our series. We should have more Versus videos coming up soon as we prepare for the Grand Prix. So please make sure you subscribe for that as well. And check out the community tab because we often post there as well with fun polls or just discussions from you fellow selectors. We really appreciate you guys taking the time to listen with us today, and may you always flip a life burst.